Metroid Prime 4 comes out next week, and Nintendo really hasn't done a whole lot of marketing for it. Despite being one of their longest developed titles, and the Metroid brand being Metroid. Instead, they decided to invite some journalists over to try out the game, showcasing the most annoying character in the game and letting them set the expectations. I am Lord Niraj, and let's talk about Metroid Prime 4. Now, I am still very excited for Prime 4. There were a few things that I am a little skeptical about their implementation, but I think the fear for this game has been overly exaggerated, mostly with the popular description of Miles McKenzie's dialogue being phrased as bad MCU humor. For me and what I've seen, there was one line where he freaks out that Samus is in a morph ball, and I didn't really like that a whole lot. But aside from that one line, I haven't really seen anything that is as bad as people are describing it to be. Nor anything else that would have me worried about Metroid Prime 4's release and quality. But still, I wanted to go over these NPCs and some of the other concerns I had for the game. But first, let me talk about what I do want to see out of Metroid Prime 4. In one of the previews complaining about Miles, they said that without Miles, it would just be Metroid Prime. However, that's not quite what I want to see. I still want that Metroid backbone. I want to see a very atmospheric game with a feeling of isolation, which can still be done with NPCs. Refined level design, gameplay, perfectly blinding exploration, first-person shooting, platforming, and just the right amount of environmental puzzles. And the number one thing I want to see is incredible pacing. But I don't want Metroid Prime 4 to just be Metroid Prime. Because I love Metroid Prime, and I enjoy replaying that title from time to time, and I don't want to have waited 7 years just to play the exact same thing over again. And just with a slightly different setting. No, I want there to be a reason for me to go back and play Metroid Prime, and a different reason for me to go back and play Metroid Prime 4. Now, for that to happen, the game will need change. However, if that change affects its core gameplay, in particular for me, its pacing, that's when I'm going to have some issues. The first potential hindrance I noticed to the pacing was bullet time, one of the abilities associated with Samus' psychic abilities. So the idea of bullet time itself is slowing down the game so that you can pull off this really cool power move. But to do that, you have to, slow down the game. But in this case, after overanalyzing the 10 seconds of footage, I'm not as worried as I was when it was first shown off or announced. It looks to be a variant of the charge beam, which makes it optional. Also, its movement is very smooth and fast, making it probably harder to pull off than it appears, and less disruptive. I think that's a main thing to keep in mind with all these trailers and stuff, is we haven't played the game yet, and we haven't seen these abilities and ideas put into action, and Nintendo just hasn't given us a lot of information. So to judge them, it's mostly based off of how they've been implemented in other titles. Now, what we do have a preview on is these NPCs. Of course, in particular, Miles McKenzie. Again, I have not yet seen a clip from Miles' dialogue that is as revolting as others are saying. It is lighthearted compared to Samus, who is still cold, cool, and seems to be enjoying Miles just about as much as everybody else is. And Samus' attitude toward Miles is what gives me hope for the atmosphere that Miles is putting at risk. This has the potential of being a very interesting contrast between her, Miles, and also Miss Fangirl over here. To see how she puts up with these two. It could be very interesting. Unless, of course, at the end of the game we learn that Sylux is your brother and that friendship is family. Our best pal Robomech sacrifices himself for the Lone Wolf Sniper so that he learns to put himself at risk to save the black guy so that he can see his family even though he dies anyway. And Miles repairs Mech Bro, so no real sacrifice was actually made, and we all leave the planet as one big happy family. Then I'm going to have a problem. But the potential or the quality of the writing aside, the general idea of NPCs being in the game can be a little concerning. With what's been confirmed, we do have escort missions. They are going to be the source of some upgrades, but mainly just the idea of scripted moments in general can be an issue. Metroidvanias, despite their maze-like design, are quite linear. Its openness is disguised by your ability to get lost and the connective routes that have you returning to previously explored areas. And the game finding clever ways to keep you on track gives the player this satisfaction of self-discovery. However, these scripted moments put that self-discovery on pause and switches the game to be a little bit more on rails. So again, aside from the quality of the Federation troop segments, they will disrupt the immersion of the independent exploration. Now, I wouldn't say this ruins the game, nor do I think these portions will be unbearable, but they are fairly likely to create a slight disconnect from the rest of the game, making these segments less enjoyable, but not necessarily bad. The last questionable decision that may have been made for the game that I noticed is Viola and the open desert. The bike itself isn't really something I'm too concerned about, for I am quite interested in how this operates in some of the more closed off areas, but that desert does look vast. And this is just something I'm going to have to wait and see. Because something that is becoming hard to gauge with this game is just how large it is. And I have no idea how much of this game is going to be spent in the desert. I'm sure I'm not going to be a big fan of farming for crystals, but perhaps I could be a big fan of the vehicle combat. With most Metroid games, there isn't much variety. You explore, fight bosses, collect upgrades, reach the end, and it uses environmental storytelling to get its story across. And the last time they veered from this and added in some voice acting, well, that ain't go too well. So change, it is something to maybe be a little skeptical about, but it's also necessary for the games to evolve. And despite everything that's been shown, I am still very excited for Metroid Prime 4's release. Because legacy and expectations aside, this game still looks incredible. Am I worried about Metroid Prime 4's quality? No. Should I lower my expectations? Well, they still are that this will be the greatest game of all time, so... Nah. Because I'd rather be disappointed because my expectations were too high rather than the previews actually being right.